Hi, everybody. Okay, so the genesis of this was anyone who's as old as I am, speaking of age and stuff like that, might.
Why are we doing that?
I don't know. You started it, but but many years ago, in the early 2000s, ancient history, and I go before that. There was this company called Graphical that had this search engine called Graphical. Does anyone remember what that is? A few do. Well, I'm going to take you through it anyway. So what I wanted to understand was when we do a typical search on Google or whatever search engine you want to use, Bing or whatever, it always comes back with text. And part of my career years ago, I was working as a part of the senior management team at Amgen. And what I wanted to understand for our research scientists and the doctors and whatnot associated with our company was not everybody, here's the premise, not everybody thinks or perceives information the same way. Text is good for some people. Other people are more visual oriented. I like both. But I like visual, and then I like to drill down into the data behind it. But don't give me a bunch of tables of data and I have to visualize what it's supposed to look like as far as a trend and whatnot. And so there were a lot of work done. Actually, it goes back even further than the 2000s, and I'll do that in a second. But why visualization? So as I said, first of all, people perceive and process information differently. For instance, one thing we all need to understand, and one of the other speakers talked about, was that we bring, Amy in fact was talking about that, was we bring a lot to the table. We think very differently than a PhD scientist does in a particular field. We just do. Doesn't take down any of their credibility, doesn't take down any of ours. We're just different the way we can pull together information, how we do it. It's, in the old days in IBM, we used to call that the magic behind the software. That's how we did it. So the question was, is text display more or less than effective way to display search results? Would visualized search results be better for faster, more efficient, and more effective? So I was talking with Mary Ellen Bates about that, and she was here earlier, but I think she disappeared. But anyway, talking about how data visualization is really a component of data mining. And so, and even today, you know, common search is still text. So what I want to do, though, is make a distinction. There's what I think of as three different areas. One is we all have done Amazon searches and all sorts of other searches, Google image searches. So you say, you find an image, you say, give me more like that. So that's an image search, okay? That's one way you can do it. Another way is you have a bunch of data and you have an Excel spreadsheet and you want to make graphs out of it. That's visualizing the data. The third way, to me, is I have an idea that I'm trying to search and I want it displayed visually, and then I want to drill down into it. Okay, so those are the three distinctions. So I'm not going to talk about image search engines, and I'm not going to talk about taking data and making images out of it. I'm talking about the third one, which is trying to get displays of search results, okay, for a different way to do it. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of the history, just like a one screen of that, and then talk about some samples that you could take a look at that are new and different. And there's one that uses AI that you may or may not be familiar with, because there was a person from that company who was here last year speaking about it. So actually, this all goes back, because I was there, back in the 1990s at Virginia Tech, and somebody's from Virginia Tech. Yay! So I was part of a team of librarians who were working globally with some of our academic partners, and one of whom was Ed Fox, Professor Ed Fox, who was I think he was part of the Digital Humanities Division, which that was like, what is that, back in the early 90s. And we all had a meeting at Virginia Tech, and he had his grad students working on visualizing search results. And this was, by the way, when the internet didn't exist yet. Okay, so they were doing that. So then later on, they never commoditized that or got patents or anything, because academics just don't do that. or at least in the old days, except if you're at Stanford and that kind of place. All right, so then in the early 2000s, this company called Graphical started doing that, and I've got some screens on that. And while I was at Amgen in the 2000s, I was experimenting with it along with my colleagues who were at then Sun Microsystems, which is now Oracle. So I'll talk just briefly about that. And then I wanted to find out, well, what's going on now and what's available that we all could use and try out, and would that make a difference? So first, the Graphical. So this is what it looked like. It was a combination of faceted search, which today we're like, faceted search, no big deal. But back then, it was a big deal. So we take a search on a topic, aggregate it into these color density, in this case, they were globes, spheres, and whatnot, and it would group them. There would be some intelligence underneath the covers that would group them. And you could see that the darker the color and the bigger the bubble, the more materials that were in that, okay? And so there was, it was doing a more or less a federated search. It was extracting data, it was clustering them together, and then visualizing them both textually and graphically. And then if you drilled down enough into the individual bubbles, you would get to the actual documents, and it would link you to the original document. So it was auditable, as we would say in some other cases, so that you could find it. And it was very interesting. So I talked to my colleagues who are now at Oracle, who were at Sun prior to that, and they were using it, and they used it with their scientists, and it was quite effective, so that, and of course they were the inventors of Java, so they used Java underneath the covers to do this. So you can see where they would do a search term and get these bubbles and whatnot. And so they would promote it, and this I found was really cute. So they combined underneath the covers a federated search of ACM Digital Library, IEEE Electronic Library, and some other sources for their researchers. And there's a quote that Christy Confetti-Higgins gave me which talked about how that really helped the scientists find trends and look at things a lot differently. And this was the same time that I was trying to test this out. And in fact, our company was listed as a partner with the Grox's company in an article about whatever happened to them in 2009. And I was like, I was the one that was the partner. So if you want to know more details about that, I can tell you. But I just wanted to talk about that. That was then. Okay, now, so they came up with this information visualization value proposition, Christy and Cindy Hill, who was her boss at the time. And we were doing the same thing. So it's easier and faster to discover and use information using tools like this. It's an alternative to text display of search results. It's a new way to perceive information, and has potential for competitive advantage, and that's why you don't hear about it. Because when companies are using that, they're not going to tell you. So chances are, in fact, when I was exchanging some emails this week with Christy, she said, well, let me send you some screens that I can share with you. Even though it's 10 years later, there's still some certain things that they were able to find out that they're probably using today in techniques with more advanced tools, just as the Amgen, which I left 10 years ago myself, is using all sorts of stuff that I have no idea anymore. It's, you know, what I did 10 years ago in biotech company is ancient history. So you have to keep that in mind. So, all right, so what I want to take you through then is some other tools, and there's one that's missing in here that I'll mention in a second. So there's something called GlamMap. Are any of you familiar with GlamMap? Good, this will be new to you. So, and then there's a joint venture with some European countries and OCLC called CatVis, which I'll talk about, and then Google Trends, and then this new company that was a speaker here last year called UNO that I'll mention as well. Okay, so this is GlamMap. What it is this is a graphical display of the complete holdings of the National Library of Australia, color-coded by, each of those little strange rounded squares are located at the place of publication of each of their items, and the colors are coded by the date of the publication, going back to the 1700s or the 1600s, that kind of thing. So, and you can go online, and there's a link at the end of my presentation. You can go in and you can navigate around and get into it. And so what you see on the right-hand side is you get details. If you zoom in, you get details of the actual item. So this is a different way to look at the old-fashioned card catalog, which is very interesting to see. It's like, gee, if I look back at that map and say, gee, that's pretty, they've got materials from all over the world. Now, your collection may or may not be the same. And if you're in a specialized library, like I was at the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles for, for 8 years, it would be very interesting to see what that collection, it was very deeply concentrated in certain scientific disciplines and historical disciplines, but age-wise, because we had materials going back to the 1600s in our special collections, as well as all sorts of other stuff. And it'd be interesting to know, is there a certain density, and then to show that to the senior management and say, well, this is something very interesting that you could talk about to boards of trustees or to donors and things like that. So, they call it a geospatial visualization tool. And so that was interesting. And then on the bottom, you see, you can call up a timeline, and that's color-coded to match the geographic map. So you can see where the light color blues are the early 1700s, whereas the purplish color, the deep purple, is more recent. So you can tell by the size of that thing, that rounded square, and also the color densities as to how much is where. And it's a very interesting way to look at things. Okay, so then a different approach of using some of the same tool underneath the covers is this GlamMap project, which is a database of visualizing linguistic data of all over the world as well. And those circles represent the different languages and how the density of those languages and whatnot. And on the bottom is a graph about that. And then you can also pull up on the side different geographic categories and distribution. So it gives you an idea. So I wanted to show you, and this was done back around 2015. And then just silence. And I've looked and looked and looked. But I did find this project, which is still going on, which is called CATVIS. And it's a joint project between OCLC Research, the University of Amsterdam, the Netherlands Organization for Scientific Research, who's funding this, and the University of Technology, and I forget where. But so you've got this, and their whole thing was, how can librarians use data visualization to manage, analyze, and present data collections? And how can large bibliographic data sets be represented? And that's still going on. And they've published some research on it, but the research is, if you're a computer scientist, you'd be really into it. I looked at the research publications, and they're just they're in an alien language to me. So what I was hoping was Roy Tennant would be here, who just recently retired from OCLC Research, and ask him, what went on with this? What's going on with this? Because there's been not a peep, or at least not online. I couldn't find anything. So, all right, so moving on. So what's going on today? Well, Google, is doing all sorts of things. You can try out something called Google Trends, and it's a data visualization project where they have the Google News Lab working with all sorts of organizations to visualize data. And this is, it's been this way for a while. I thought 8 months ago I pulled this up, and I checked yesterday, and it's still the same graphics and same sample, so they really haven't changed them. But there's all sorts of different ways of seeing visuals of searches that have been done on the Google database, and that's really interesting. And a related project that they're doing is the Google News Lab, where they work with journalism organizations and academia as well to visualize news stories, and that's quite interesting to see. And there's some 3D kind of things, and I didn't want to capture the 3D because we just didn't have time. So this is ongoing, and you can try this out. and just see what the possibilities are. So then, last year there was a woman from which is a company that's only been around for a couple of years, who gave a talk here. I was here, but I think I missed it somehow. So I think I was speaking in the other session, that's why. So I would have absolutely caught on this. But I've been communicating with them this week. And what you see, I grabbed this as a screenshot from their website, and I'm chatting with them this week. What they've got is a combination of visualization tools that do a lot of faceted searching and AI underneath the covers, much like the old Graphical engine does. And Cindy Hill, who's at the Federal Reserve in San Francisco, who used to be the head of the Sun Library. She's the one who told me about this. And the Santa Clara District Public Library uses this engine a little bit, but she said underneath the covers, they kind of use just Wikipedia right now, so they're just testing it out. But what it does is, you see on the right-hand side, they have these different tools, and one is called Discover, which is for academia and education to aggregate information and then pull it up into these spider diagrams, among others, and puts relationships together. And there's all sorts of little case studies that they just sent me last night, and I didn't get a chance to get permission, so I can't show you them without them giving me permission. But they were very interesting because they were studies of librarians and researchers using this to like, for instance, a typical assignment of a senior in a college or a graduate student is come up with your PhD project, right? And you want to know the relationship between this culture and this happening in climate in the 1800s, and is there a connection as to why people navigated a certain way? I don't know. I'm just coming up with things right now. But, you get the idea. And this tool enables you to get those ideas and pull them together and then navigate to them. And for us, it's important because it's giving us a different way to yield. So when Amy was talking about how robots are taking over our jobs, this is the kind of stuff that she was talking about. I was thinking, some of the questions she had, this could answer, actually, or potentially could answer. Be interesting to test it out. So, Amy, I'm going to ask her to check that out. But so they've got a couple of different tools, and if you go to their website, it's very, very superficial because they have a lot of different projects with a lot of different organizations, but you have to talk to them. So. That's all I know about that. So, but it's an interesting one that let's watch that, because companies like that, and there's more coming up. And there's one that I just had came across, and then I forgot to add something called flowing data, which back in 2009, which seems to be the nexus of when everything kind of just went into the dump somewhere, because Grok 6, flowing data, all sorts of companies were there and then disappeared. But flowing data is still around, and they claim to have data visualization sketches for Google search results. But they're saying how wonderful it would be back in 2009 if we could visualize search results, from Google, and then nothing. But I was just looking earlier on my iPad mini, and I found some stuff, but it was just charts and graphs, so that was not very interesting to me. So anyway, my point of my talk is that visual search technology is continually improving, and use of visual search expanding across all arenas. There's this quote I found in one of these marketing type articles. Pinterest CEO Ben Silberman has previously said that the future of search will be about pictures rather than keywords. Well, of course, because that's what Pinterest is all about. Duh. But to me, there is value in visualizing text search results. And in fact, one of the author of the article said it's a different thing, which is right. It's a different thing, and there's still a lot of potential there. So there's a bunch of resources. The PDF of this is on the conference website, and you can click through those and take a look at those and see what you need. And my information, contact information, including QR code, which I know it's an old thing, that's yesterday's news, but people still use it. It's there. And I know we're going to have questions later. So thank you.